Now let's talk about cellular reproduction and cancer. Why are we discussing cancer? Well, cancer is what you get when cell reproduction or mitosis goes awry. Well, lots of things go awry, but especially cell division. And cancer is one of those things that has affected all of us in one way or another, most likely, or at least the vast majority of us. So it's very personally relevant, and it's something that hopefully makes this a little bit more interesting. So let's orient to what we've got here. On the left, we have a graphic, a schematic of the cell cycle. Now the cell cycle, a lot of us when we think of the cell cycle, at least at first, think about mitosis. Because after all, that's kind of the big, main event of the cell divides. But it turns out actually most of the cell cycle isn't mitosis or M phase as it is here. It's either getting ready for it. All of this stuff around most of the circle is what we'll talk about later is called interphase. And lots of cells don't actually spend a huge amount of their time dividing or any time dividing. Lots of cells will spend time in what we call G0 or G0. And so this is when the cell is just sitting around waiting for a signal that tells it that it needs to divide. And in the cases of some cells, like your heart cells or the lens of your eyes, that signal's never going to come. Or in other cells, like your liver cells, maybe it'll only happen when it's necessary, when there's some cells that need to get made. On the right here is a schematic of what happens in normal cell division when we're doing normal growth and reproduction versus what happens with cancer. So box A, we start out with one cell and it divides into two identical cells. It's doing this because for some reason we need to have more of this cell. One of the cells sits here, probably in G0, and the other one is going to divide again. But during that second division, something goes wrong. One of the daughter cells maybe gets a mutation. Something happens, maybe the DNA is damaged, and that cell isn't quite right. There are lots of natural processes to cause that cell to die. So when something goes wrong, because we're a multicellular organism, we can just get rid of the cell where something went wrong and we'll probably be fine. So, all right, instead of 3 cells, we've got 2, but the 2 cells that we got are perfectly healthy and will continue doing whatever it is they normally do. In cancer, by contrast, we're starting out with a cell where something went wrong. A cell where there's a mutation, a problem with the DNA, a signaling issue, something that's telling it to divide, regardless of whether or not it needs to divide. And it's deaf to the signals that would have told it up here, no, something's wrong, you need to commit suicide, it's very important. And that's something that, for an individual organism is a terrible idea, but for a cell, well, the individual cell is still dead, but the whole organism is hopefully healthy. However, in the case of cancer, this cell is not getting the signals that something is wrong, or maybe it's even deaf to those signals. And so it's going to divide, and its offspring are going to divide, and their offspring are going to divide, and suddenly we have a tumor. Suddenly we're starting to develop cancer. So that's the big picture. The cell cycle is normal, the cell cycle is necessary, and there are controls to try and keep things from going awry, but they don't always work. So how do cells grow and divide? We're going to talk about the really big picture. So we've got a cell. It has its genetic material. It has lots of organelles. We'll say this is a eukaryotic non-plant cell of some sort. So, in order to be able to divide, the first thing that it needs to do is get bigger. So let me actually draw that bigger. So it needs to get substantially bigger. It needs to make more of its organelles, because if it's going to divide those organelles evenly between itself and its daughter cell, it had better have enough, right? You don't want to split yourself in half and then find yourself coming up short in the mitochondria department. That's not going to be healthy for anybody. And inside of its nucleus, here in green, it's necessary for it to replicate its DNA, make copies, so that rather than one copy of, each chromosome, one from mom, one from dad, it has got the two. And then it has to actually split all of this stuff evenly between its two daughter cells so that we can successfully end up with two identical cells that hopefully look substantially similar, if not exactly identical, to the original parent cell. And apologies for the bad drawings. You know by this point, there are much better pictures coming up soon. But hey, sometimes it helps me to draw along. So why grow and divide? Because this process, this growing and copying its organelles, copying its DNA, getting everything separated correctly, it's difficult, it's even a little dangerous because things can go wrong in this, cancer-causing way. So why do we do it? Well, if you're going to grow, if you're going to get bigger, you need more cells. If you're going to develop, you need more cells. In this upper right, this is one of the very first things that happened over the course of your life. Your little lump of cells that originally started from one egg cell has to multiply, 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 so that you have enough cells so that you can start forming an actual body structure and start forming organs and start all of this stuff. Cells will also copy themselves for repair and regeneration. If you get a cut in your skin cells are going to divide to make new skin. In this case, we have a sea star that has lost a couple of its arms. Actually, it's lost a number of its arms. And it is in the process, if you look closely here, of actually growing new replacement arms. So it is regenerating parts of its body. We do not have the luxury of doing this, but hey, what you gonna do? We have more brains than a sea star, probably have more fun. And it can also, cell division, allow for asexual reproduction in organisms that are able to do it. Microbes, by and large, this is how they reproduce. They're not going to go through all that complicated weirdness of sex. They're just going to split in half, bada bing, bada boom. There you have more new microbes. And this is sort of a fun case. Some of you may have had this little house plant. All these little fluffy things along the edges of its leaf that look like ruffles, those are actually tiny baby plants that are growing, which are an exact copy of the parent plant. Once they're big enough, they have leaves, they have roots, they have a stem. They're actually just going to drop off, roots, stem and all, plant themselves wherever they fall, and make more copies of that parent plant.